everyone! Today we're going to be going over sculpting in Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D has some really powerful sculpting tools, and today we're going to go over all of the different tools and all the different settings to kind of show what they do. If you've never done sculpting before, this is the tutorial that you should watch. You'll have a pretty good understanding of it from A to Z once you're done with this this tutorial series. What we're also going to do is we're also going to model this 3D Homer head so that you can see some of the use cases for some of these brushes. Some of the brushes you're going to use all the time, and some of them you're only going to use for a little bit for very specific cases. And you'll see that once we model this. We're also going to go through re-topologizing and workflows within sculpting, and also I'll show you how to use vector displacement in the standard C4D in order to have very low res, transferring really high res displacement into a really low res mesh. It's going to save you a ton come render time. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so we're in Cinema 4D right now. What we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and start with a sphere. A sphere is normally, you know, depending on what you're sculpting, once we get to the Homer head, we're actually going to be using a capsule, but a sphere is a good place to start to show what everything does. I'm going to go up to my display and I'm going to do garage shading lines so that we can actually see what the mesh looks like. And then we're going to go over to our type and change it to hexahedron. This is a really good one because you get all these quads. If you had the standard one, you see up here you've got some tries, and it'll create like a really gross mesh. Now, if you're going to go through and retopologize, then you're going to be creating a new mesh anyway. But if you're not, if you're just doing like a sculpt and want to just do a single render and not worry about rigging or anything like that, then you'd want to go over to hexahedron because it creates a more even mesh. All right, so now that we've got that, the biggest thing with sculpting, well, not the biggest thing, it's just one thing with sculpting, is that your stuff needs to be editable. So we can go ahead in here and hit C, or you can hit this little button right here to make editable. Now let's go ahead and jump into our sculpting layout. All right, so now that we've got that, what we're going to do is we're going to hit Subdivide. And now you see it didn't really do anything, but it did. So it did nothing to the mesh, but up here in our objects, you can see it added a sculpting tag to our sphere. And then in our sculpting layers, it set it at level 0. So level 0 is basically the mesh that we're starting with. And as you subdivide, you see we get more topology. As we subdivide, our level goes up. So we can work in a lower level, we can work in a higher level. Now, why would we want to do that? So lower levels like 0 or 1 are good for like big moves. Like say you do the grab tool and you grab it like that. You know, normally if you're doing big moves like this and not detailed ones, you can be in a lower level. You can still do stuff like this in a higher level. I just have a tendency to work in the lower level and then increase it as I want to do more and more detail. So let's undo that a couple times. Let's get back to our circular mesh. And let's go ahead and look at what we've got. So subdivide, you've seen that. Increase and decrease, you know, will increase and decrease your subdivision. So if you want to go through and make some changes on a lower level or increase it and make some more details on a higher level, you can go ahead and do that. Volume mesh, we're going to come back to that. Okay, so we've got pull, grab, smooth, wax, knife, pinch, flatten, inflate, amplify, fill, repeat, and scrape, and erase. So a lot of these tools have all the same settings down here. Now, once you realize that, it makes it easier to understand a lot of these sculpting things. So normally when you jump into a program and you're like, oh, I'm too nervous, I don't know what to do, because there's so many different settings. Once you realize that a lot of these settings are exactly the same, you really only have to learn one tool. Okay, so let's start with pull. What does pull do? So pull will do exactly like it says, and it will pull the mesh out. So as you can see, actually, let's start with this. So you can see here, I've got my brush, and if you hold down the middle mouse and go left or right, it will make your brush bigger and smaller. And if you hold down middle mouse and go up and down, it will make the brush pressure higher or lower, or more intense. So you can see right here, we've got it really high, and so it's pulling it really well. And then you'll see here, we've got it really low, and it doesn't seem to do much at all, okay? So that's the important thing to understand. Now in here in our settings, you can see as I adjust the size goes up and the pressure goes up as well. So you can go through and you can change it here, but I like to visually see it versus like trying to guess and then come out here and then guess and try to come out here. So yeah, that's a good place to start. Okay, so in our pull, what does pull do? Pull pulls the geometry. So it pulls up the geometry. If we're creating different things, we can pull the geometry and stuff like that. If you want to create some cool wormy things or like create a brain or something like that, you can do that. The pull is also really good for when you're using brushes, and we'll get into that in a second. Okay, so let's undo. The first thing is link size, link pressure, link symmetry, and back face. So link size, link pressure, and link symmetry, what does it do? So watch my tool as I switch from pull to grab. Okay, so you see how it changed size significantly? Because previously when I was grabbing, I was using a large brush in order to grab. Now say we wanted to link all of these together. If you do link size, link pressure, and link symmetry, when I switch over to grab, it stays the same, or smooth, or wax, or any of these. They will stay the same. And if you unclick them, pull, go back to grab, let's make it bigger, let's go back to pull, see? And so they differ in sizes now. So what is backface? Backface, if I unclick it, and I'm inside the mesh, and I'm trying to like sculpt and stuff, you see nothing happens. Now if you click on backface, basically it's working from inside the mesh, and it allows you to deform things from inside the mesh. See, if I turn it off, nothing. I can't do anything. I have to be outside of the mesh. So yeah. That's what backface does. Okay, so keep visual size. What does that mean? So if we have this clicked, and then as we zoom in and zoom out, you'll see that the brush size actually stays the same relative to where we are. Now, if we unclick keep visual size, it's going to stay the same size brush. So as I zoom in, you see the brush stays the same size relative to the object, not relative to the camera. So let's do that. Do that. See? Pretty cool. Now, preview mode on surface or screen. So right now, notice the circular thing is going along the surface and changing. If we change it to screen, it will stay flat the whole time. So, and then you can do off if you want to just take the preview thing off. I prefer to work in on surface. Okay, so brush presets, let's not worry about that right now. You know, size and pressure. Steady stroke. Okay, so if we click that on and we bring this down, now you'll see a little blue line following right behind it. And what this does is that it actually smooths out. It like makes the movement on your brush a little bit smoother. So let's go ahead, let's do our length a little bit higher to show it. So you can see, so as you're going along, it actually doesn't start doing the pull until the very like back area of the blue. So like you can really see if you're trying to make these really detailed things and get into specific crevices and have specific movements, you can very easily move around. Cool. Okay, so that's steady stroke. You can turn that off, and then the blue line doesn't come up anymore, you know. Let's see, spacing. Okay, cool. Let me undo this and clear that out. Spacing. What spacing does is, now it's really low right now, so you don't really see it. Let's bring this up a lot. What it's going to do is it's going to space out, and then let's bring up our brush amount a lot. You see it's making these little stipples, these little dots. It's spacing out basically the brush. So instead of doing one long stroke, it's actually spacing out the strokes. Let's subdivide that a couple times so you can see it. Yeah. You can see as we go along, it's doing that. This is really good for like, if you're wanting to create like a I don't know, say like a cool, neat little skin or something on like a reptile or something, or if you want to give someone some really bad acne, yeah, or not, whatever. But that's basically what spacing does, and the percentage is how far apart you do the spacing. Okay, let's look at edge detect. So I've got a pole, and it's I've switched it over to a cube because it's a lot easier to see what the example is with a cube, because it's got very obvious angles. So you'll see my brush is a lot bigger than the areas that we're going to be working. And so as I pull, notice it doesn't pull the edges of the cube there. It stays and just pulls the middle parts. That's because this angle is a 90-degree angle, and we've set the angle to 45. So it's going to ignore everything higher than 45. So see, as we go along, it's going to ignore that, but it is actually going to do this edge because we have a 45-degree or less than a 45-degree angle here. All right, cool, and that's edge detect. Draw mode. We've got freehand, drag rectangular, drag dabs, line, lasso fill, polyfill, rectangular fill, and you'll understand this pretty quick. So freehand is just exactly what it says. It's freehand. You know, you can go through, you can make whatever strokes you want. So drag rectangular, as you can see, as I drag out, it drags it up. So let's go ahead and let's bring our pressure up, then bring our size up as well. You can see as we drag out, it's dragging up that area, which is cool. And this will work really well once we've got a brush. You know, we can actually set a brush and we can easily find where we want. Okay, so drag dabs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and adjust my fall off real quick on my brush so that you can see it a little bit better. So drag dabs is what it does is when I press down, it follows along with my mouse until I let go. So I can go through and I can kind of like really art direct where I want my poles to go. And this one will also be really good once we're using brushes as well. So, all right, cool. That's drag dabs. What else? Let's take off edge detect. Next is line. So you can draw a line out just pressing a couple times and then right click to set that line. Cool. Let me bring down my thing and then say you wanted to create like a star or something like that. You do that. There we go. We got a star. Sweet. Next is lasso fill. So we're creating a lasso and then that pulls that area. So you can go in, create, bum, and that pulls out that area. And then the rest of these are very similar. You've got polyfill. You're basically creating like a polygon, but, you know, or creating a shape. It's like a linear selection. And then rectangular fill. Rectangular fill is just a rectangle. And it's in a 2D space or whatever, but in that 3D space. All right, cool. Let's undo that a couple of times. All right, cool. Now, direction. We've got normal, X, Y, Z, and camera. So most of the time, you're going to be working in normal because basically that's going to be following the normals of, whoops, that's going to be following the normals of the, of each individual polygon. Now, if we change that to X, it's only going to go along in the X axis. So it's only going to be pulling, as you can see, in the X direction. Same with Y and same with Z. So Y, you see as we go along, it only pulls up in the Y direction, and then Z, you see it only pulls along in the Z direction. So that's easy. And then camera, it's going to be pulling towards wherever the camera is. So if you're working up here and you want it pulling towards the camera, you can see that's what it does there. Cool. But most of the time you're going to want normal. And then build up. Now build up is very interesting. It took me a little bit to understand it because it seems very similar to pressure. But what build up is, think about it as it's a multiplier of the pressure. It's not exactly a multiplier because you're not multiplying the pressure by 50 times, but it's adding to the amount of pressure. So say, for example, we've got our buildup at 50 and our pressure there. We go through and we create this. Let's bring our buildup down, and you can see it adds less pressure. It basically, divides or multiplies the amount of pressure that you're using. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then invert is if you want to invert it. Now that we've gone through this, I want to show a couple of little things that you can do. So when you're going through, let me undo the invert, as this brings it up really well. Let me go ahead and reset my fall off too. Okay, so as you're going along and sculpting, say you want to smooth some things out. So instead of going over to the smooth button and start smoothing that out, you can actually hold the shift key down, and that will smooth everything out for you. So as you're holding down the shift key and going along, you can smooth this stuff out. Now, say you want to invert it and you don't want to come over here and hit invert. You can hold down the control key, and that will invert whatever brush you're on. You see that? Cool. Let's undo that a couple times. All right. Next off is fall off. Now you saw what I did earlier. The fall off is basically the fall off of the brush. So right here, we've got a pretty even fall off. You can see the shape of the curve right there, shape of the curve. But if we were to bring this up all the way, you can see it creates a very plateaued, flat looking fall off right there. And you can see link size, link pressure, link symmetry, backface, keep visual size, and preview mode are all on no matter which ones you press. Okay, let's look at stamp. So stamp has all the same stuff up here. Down here, we've got a stamp preset we can load. We can use a stamp image material. Let's go ahead and click on use stamp, and you see it activates a lot of these different settings. Now, when I'm using a stamp, what I tend to do is go up to my presets, and then in our presets, sculpt brush presets, we've got a ton of different stamps that we can use in here. So for example, let's go to organic, and let's go ahead and grab these scales. So when we double click on this, you see it brings it up in our image, and it brings a little preview of it down here. If we click use fall off or unuse fall off, whatever. And then in our settings, you'll also notice that it automatically, if we're using brushes up here, it automatically turns on some different things, such as spacing for this one in particular. So as we go through, let me increase this so that you can see. Let me bring up my pressure. You can see it's actually spacing it out. But you can use that stamp in order to create this this scales type thing. So which is awesome, because then you don't have to go through and physically sculpt like skin or something like that on any sort of like creature or person that you're creating, and you get this really cool looking skin or topology, which is neat. And then we can export that out to a normal map or a displacement map later, and we'll get to that. So as far as the stamp, let's look at rotation. So watch this as I'm making these adjustments. Like the preview gives you a little preview of what it is. Flip symmetry. If you have that clicked on, you can flip the X or you can flip the Y. Why would you want to do that? Well, if things start looking too similar, you can flip the Y and then go through and do the stuff. Flip the X so that you've got the X and Y flipped, and then you can turn them both off, you know, and so it helps create differences throughout your stamp by using the same stamp. Gray value. Now, this one might be a little bit hard to understand. Go ahead and smooth some stuff out so we can actually, so I can show you. So if you've got a gray value of 0, what it's going to do is it's going to see if I can, let's bring up our multiplier to like 100. So you can see it brings it up from the mesh. Okay. So imagine mesh is like, the mesh is like 0.5. Okay. Because this gray value goes from 0 to 1. So 0, we're going to be bringing it up from the mesh. If you go to 1, it's going to be sinking it in from the mesh. So for example, here we go. This is at, 1, and then this is at 0. So it brings it up versus kind of indenting it. All right, cool. Okay, next up we've got follow. If we, this is kind of hard to understand, but basically the brush will rotate along with your, with the stroke. So let me subdivide this a couple more times so you can kind of see this. Okay, so we've got a really high mesh right now. Let's unclick follow so you can see. So as it goes along, it just creates that brush. You can see when we're super high res, this brush looks really cool, right? There's no rhyme or reason to the way everything is laid out. But say we wanted to create like some like a ridge along someone's back, you know, or like a crocodile with its ridge along there. What we can do is we can do follow, and it will create the same type of thing all the way along. You can see how this has no rhyme or reason, but this actually follows it with the stroke. Cool. All right, so let's undo that. Let's go back a couple of subdivisions. Cool. So use fall off. If you don't want it to use the fall off, you can see as I click that, it just it goes straight into it. There's no fall off at all. Let's see. So we can click that back on. If there was an alpha channel, if you clicked alpha, it would use the alpha channel. This one does not have an alpha channel, so that option is not there. So show depth is just for the preview down here. The higher areas will be shown in green, and then the lower areas will actually be shown in red. So if you're wanting to see a preview of the depth, let me use fall off, and you can kind of see that a little bit better. And then, all right, so bilinear, let me subdivide this a couple more times to see if we can see what this does. If we unclick bilinear, and as we're going along, then let's click bilinear. And it's really hard to see for this, but basically what it does is it the abrupt transition between pixels. It can be softened by clicking bilinear. It's hard to see here, but if you're getting some rough transitions between your brush, as you can see here, I guess it kind of softens it a little bit. It's hard to see. Mostly I just click it on. And then enclose. Now let me back up a little bit. What enclose does is enclose, you can see it changes here. What it does is it fits the square, because this image is actually just a square. It's not circular. It will fit it within the circle stamp. If you hit enclose, it will make the edges all the way to the edge. You can see it changes size. So if we hit enclose, and then let's increase our subdivisions a couple times, you can see it creates the square, the full square, which may not always be what you want. See, because then we can just smooth it out around the edges if we wanted, you know. Gross. So yeah, that's what enclose does. So let's go ahead and back up a couple. All right, that's done with stamp. Symmetry. We have local, world, and work plane. So if we want to work right now local, let's click on X and Y. You can see we get, you can see we get 2 dots that show up along the X and Y. So whatever we do here mirrors it on the opposite side, which is great because it means most of the time, if we're doing like faces or something like that, we only have to do one side. Like if we're creating like an ear or some eyebrows or something like that, we only have to do one side. And that'll be, the same for YZ, ZXY. So if you want to do all 4, that's kind of cool. So if you want to create this cool, like, neat looking thing here, you can have them all clicked on at once. It's kind of neat. That's kind of cool, Great organic, gross looking egg thing. All right. That's symmetry. We can also do in world. So say, for example, right now it's going to look the same. Let's see, where's my... Yeah, it's going to look the same. But say, for example, our object was moved over here. When we do our pull and we go over to world, you'll see here it doesn't do the same because the world coordinates are basically here. This is where center is. So world, you can see like if I'm doing here, it's doing the whole world coordinates, you know, and XYZ, you won't really see anything because it's like there's nothing over here to sculpt, if that makes sense. And then work plane, like your work plane on your grid right here, for example, you know, that'll create symmetry there. So that's it. Let's see, let's go back to local, and then let's change our coordinates back to 0. And then go back over to that. Okay, cool. Now we can do radial. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's bring this down. And you can do radial symmetry. See, as I'm doing this, it's pulling it out in a radial pattern. So number of radial strokes, you can see a preview right here. So we'll get 5, right? So let's unclick this and see if this does anything. So yeah, if you want to turn off, like if you want to do a radial symmetry versus like along the X or Y axis, you can do that. And that depends on, it all depends on where you start, which is cool, you know? Let's subdivide that one time. And then bring our brush down so you can see as we're going along. That's super cool right there. That's pretty neat, you know? All right, and you can select your radial symmetry. Oh man, if you want to do that, so you can see a preview of it as well. See that? And we can see X, Y. Print. See, if you're wanting to set the specific plane where the radial symmetry is, like right there, I've got it on YZ. Let's go to point, undo. Point is kind of like what we were doing before. All right, cool. Custom point. Okay, let's look at custom point. Now, if you just click on it, nothing's really going to happen. Let me decrease my brush size. Let's do a subdivide again. We can kind of see this and then increase our. So if we go to our symmetry and then we do radial 6 and we do custom point, let's go ahead and turn this off right now. So right now you see that it's creating 6 radial strokes from the center. Now, that's because we've got it off. If we click it on, let me go back. What we need to do, notice this little center dot right there. That's where our point is going to be, all right? So we can go and we can make this. Let me increase my strength a little bit more. And then let's subdivide one more time so we get to see it a little bit better. So you can see that little center part is where it is. Now, if I change, it's always going to stay in that center part. And this is because we've got custom point on. So if we want to change that point, what we have to do, we right click and then that will set, you see, the new point. So then we can work from there out. So let's go over here, we right click and that sets the new point. So that's what the custom point is. And so that way we can work our way out, or we'll know where the point is and we can work our way in. Cool. Now, number of radial strokes, you can see the example down here. This is 6. The more you bring up, the more radial strokes you're going to have. Let me bring down the size and you can see, let's make a custom point there. As we go along, sweet. Now it's got 9 points. If we increase more, undo, let's make a custom point. Now we've got 13 points. Awesome. Okay, so this radial gap angle, basically this is like a branching type thing. So if right now we've got 5 individual points, and let me go ahead and show this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna jack this up all the way to 90, and you'll see it now only has 2 that it's shooting off, but there are 5 strokes right here. So as we do this, let's set a point. It does 5, but only in 2 directions. So as we go down, you can see it's adding more and more per main point. So right here, we've got 5 going off in that direction. And if we go down, we'll have 5 going in each of those directions. So the number of radial strokes, if we bring this up, you'll see we're adding more and more strokes, and that's just the amount of gap in between each of the big or the main center ones. So you can see 0, and there's going to be 8. Awesome. Okay, so radial gap, if we increase this, you can see kind of what this gives you a preview of what the pattern's going to look like. It's going to add more things on it. So you can see as we go along, it gets bigger. Let me make a smaller brush so you can see, for example. You see it goes along and it creates more of these strokes. So if we were like to increase it a whole lot, you can see it creates some cool things like that. That's pretty rad. All right. Okay, stencil. Now, stencil is similar to stamp in a way, but you'll see it as soon as I load up an image. Okay, so I'm going to click on Use Stencil, and then I'm going to open up just a little stamp that I made. Now, you can see instantly what happens. Now, I think the default is like 90 and the angle 0. I was playing around with this, and the scale is 1 to match your full size. So you see it brings up this image that I have here that I just made in Photoshop real quick. And as we click on here and pull it up, you'll see it does the stencil based on wherever the stencil is on your screen. So you can change your transparency as well. And then let's just click, you'll see, boom. So you see it creates that stencil there of the actual thing, which, you know, I personally like the stamp better, you know, but that's just me. If you want to do something where you're actually like stamping something on, you know, or doing a stencil, like that's cool. You know, I would want to bring down my my brush strength a little bit, you know, but check us out. So just stamp or stencil, and there you go. So within this, we can change the transparency of it on screen. We can change the angle if we want, and we can change the scale. So for example, we could do something like that. See, then as we move, you can see it has done a stencil of that. Now you can tile X, tile Y, see, so you could create multiple stencils of it. And then boom, let's turn that off. Didn't do anything, tile X, tile Y. Oh yeah, because I only went in one area. So you can see as I go along, that's kind of cool. All right. All right, I'll give it to you, stencil. That was kind of neat. So you could create a waffle. You wanted to create a waffle. You could use a stencil pretty easily. Yeah, that's kind of neat. And so you could work like, say, for example, you wanted to work just in like the top and you wanted to stencil, right? So let's go ahead and do this. We could work entirely in it and we could create a waffle. There you go. So pretty easy. Then once we come out, we've got that waffle pattern. Let me turn these off so you can't see them anymore. That's pretty cool. Cool. And then you can adjust the scale, the translate, you know, if you want to move it on the X or Y. Tile X and Y, you saw what that did. Flip X and Y if you want to flip them. And then the same gray value as the symmetry where it either pushes in or pushes out based on what the gray value is. Awesome. Let's move on. Okay, so the modifiers can be used. Let's go ahead and click it on and I'll show you. So we've got smooth, pinch, inflate. So you can use these in addition to what you currently have. So what your current tool is. So pull, if I wanted to pinch as well, and I wanted to turn that strength up, let me subdivide a couple times. You can see as I've still got the symmetry on. Let's turn off the radial. Let's go over here. So if I'm pulling, I need to turn my strength up. Let's subdivide one more time. So as I'm pulling, I still have a stamp. Let's turn that off as well. All right. So as I'm pulling, it's also pinching as well. So I can create this neat little ridge. Now, similar with smoothing. So let me turn off pinch so you can see what it would look like normally. Then I turn it back on and it pinches it. You know, and I think you can also do this with your fall off as well. But it's sometimes it's cool to use the modifiers. So pinches it, it inflates it. Now let's turn off pinch. So it'll inflate it as well. Let's turn up the strength a lot so you can really see what it does. Versus if we don't have it on, it kind of looks similar, but it inflates it just a little bit. So that's what the modifiers is. Think of it as being able to add an additional type of tool to the current tool that you're using. So that's all the settings. Now let's check this out. Look, all the same settings exist for almost all of these things, all of the tools. The only changes that are different are within the initial settings. So as I click through, you can see a lot of these have some different settings with them. So for grab, for example, has direction. Which direction? It's the same as our direction here. Normal mouse, which way it's grabbing. So for example, if we grab only along the x-axis, it's only going to grab along the x-axis. You see? Okay, I've kind of messed with this a little bit to show you what example the surface distance does. So like say we've got a mouth or something like that. If we've got it unclicked and we're just trying to move the bottom part, it moves the top part a lot. If I unclick this, it's only going to move that. It's basically going to see the distance between the two surfaces and only adjust that. Okay, so smooth has all the same settings as well. Steady stroke, spacing, edge detect, you know all that. The only difference one here is flood. So if we go ahead and click on that, you can see what it does is it smooths the entire mesh a lot. So flood, 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 if you're just wanting to smooth out the entire mesh. Wax, you got the build up, invert, wax mode, flow over, or valley. So all these are the same, the build up, the invert, flow over, or valley. So let's go ahead and create some stuff and I can show you what it does. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull some areas. Let's go into wax. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on flow over. So you can see it flows over our initial pulls that we had done. Now if I click over valley, what it's going to do is it's going to leave those there and kind of build up on top of it. Okay, cool. And then knife. Let's go ahead and clear these out. Knife is for like kind of it pinches in a way. It's similar to the pinch tool in that it kind of cuts out areas. This is good for like if you're creating mouths. You know, you can do that, and then you can do the pinch tool as well to kind of put them together. Yep. So the knife, you've got the amount of pinch and the amount of push. So pinch versus, let's see how much. Oh, sorry. That was a lot more pinch, and this is a lot more push. See? So it pushes in the amount, and then the amount of pinch is how much it's cutting in. Let's go ahead and bring that down so you can see. That's pretty cool. Let's see. Pinch. Pinch is similar, where it just pinches the topology together. So this really works hand in hand with like a knife, or if you've got a like an inverted pull or something, it will pinch the topology together. And then pinch is really good for creating details or kind of amplifying those details. So say, for example, you go through and you use the knife tool in order to create some wrinkles and stuff. You can use the pinch tool to really amplify those things. So say, for example, let's go ahead and just do this. I'm going to undo. I'll use the knife tool and I'll go through and I'll create like some wrinkles and stuff, right? And then what I can do is I can grab the pinch and that will, no, my brush is too big right now, but I can go through and I can do this and pinch the things together to like really amplify those wrinkles and stuff. You see? All right, let's undo. No new settings on pinch, flatten. The only ones here are fixed plane and smooth. So what flatten does is it basically flattens it. So if we were doing like some boots or something and we wanted to flatten it to the work plane, what we could do is we could do this here, you know, or some shoes or something like that, or hooves. You can flatten that towards the work plane, and so that it's nice and flat. We can smooth that out if we wanted to. And then you get a good transition from the flattened one all the way. Whoop. So smooth that out. And then you see you get a flattened like foot or hoof or whatever you want to do. Let's see. And that's working towards the work plane. If you do mouse down, that will flatten it towards where you click on your mouse. So if you click here, it's going to flatten it only in that area. If you click here, it's only going to flatten it in that area, to that area. Okay, what does custom plane size do? Okay, I just clicked it on, and if this is the first time using it, you won't see a plane here. What you'll have to do is you'll have to hit Control and then click on it, and you'll see a plane pop up. Now, as we move around, that's going to be the plane that it flattens to. So as I click there, that's where it's going to flatten to. You see? So, and then if I want to come over here, and I can hold down Control and click here, it will flatten to that plane now. Now we can change the plane size and the depth as well. So let's see, let's change the depth to, let's click here. And then, okay, so the depth's fine. And then as we flatten it, it will flatten to that plane. Cool. All right, that's what custom plane size does. And then we can do smooth, and that will smooth it out as well. So let's go ahead and click there. It will smooth it out as we're doing our, oh boy. It will smooth it out as we're doing our flattening. Okay, so that's flatten. And now that I've destroyed this one enough, let's start over with a new sphere. All right, inflate. Let's look at what inflate does. Inflate will inflate the area. Let me go ahead and bring the brush size up. It's similar to the pole, but as you can see, as I'm inflating, it blows it up like a balloon. And you can go ahead and inflate and inflate and inflate. Sometimes you'll notice as we're inflating, you only have a couple of polygons. So you'll need to sometimes subdivide in order to get it to look really smooth, which also increases your subdivisions everywhere else. But if you want it to look pretty smooth, you need to do that. All right, so all of these are the same versus flood. Flood will, similar to the smoothing flood, where it will just increase the entire thing. Now, why would you want to do that? I'll show you a use case example here once we get into masks. So interactive flood, you can actually do it this way as well, instead of just clicking on it once. Pretty cool. Okay, so use material for interactive. If we wanted to use let's go ahead and just show you. So let's create a new material. And the important thing is with using the materials, they need to be in the color channel. So let's go ahead and create a checkerboard surface. And let's do like a 5x5. Now in our attributes of our inflate, let's go ahead and select our material. And then we'll go back to our attributes. So we're now using that for our inflate. And you'll see as we go along, it inflates it based upon the material. Okay, had to start over because Cinema crashed on me. But I'm going to just subdivide this. And what we were doing was the inflate. Let's go into mask real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out a mask. Okay, So when you click on mask, it draws out, it allows you to draw a mask on, right? Okay, so what does this do? Think of it like Photoshop. Now I'm holding down Shift in order to smooth that out. What we're gonna do is, you see, it creates a mask up here that we can click on and click off if we want. Let's go ahead and invert that mask. Okay, now when we go into our Inflate and we interactive flood, it's only going to be messing with the area of the mask. So we can keep on inflating if we want, and we can inflate it again. So we're only inflating that area, and then we can go to our mask and we can clear our mask out if we want to do that. See, masks are super, super useful anytime you're wanting to only adjust one specific area to your sculpt. And within our mask settings, we've got mask, we've got invert mask, we've got clear mask. Let's go ahead and make a mask again. And we've got hide masked, so we can actually hide the topology if we wanted, or show masked. It's pretty cool. It's very, very cool. So let's see. So for example, why would you want to hide and show masks? So let's go ahead and create this mask, right? Whoops. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to hide it. Hide mask. Then if I'm wanting to pull, see, I can't do anything, but I could use this back face, and I could adjust from back here. Which is cool, you know, if you don't want to like get way inside of it and like, you know, mess with it there, you can use the mask feature in order to hide and show those polygons. So show masked, and then we'll just go ahead and clear that mask. It's super, super powerful, the masking ability. All right, so now that we've done inflate, let's go ahead and do amplify. Amplify will kind of amplify the different things that you've done. So let me go ahead and actually, let me clear and get me back to my starter sphere. And then let's bring this, and then I'll bring my pressure up. So I go through and I've created this little lines, and then we'll go through and we'll amplify this. So it's only going to adjust those specific areas. It's going to like kind of amplify that. Now, if we click over here, it brings it up a little bit, but it will really amplify the strokes that you've done with this. So for example, here's another example. Well, let's subdivide that again. Let's go ahead and go into our pull. I'm going to go into stamp. Let's grab a preset here, bring this down, presets, sculpt brush. Let's do organic, and then I'll grab some scales, for example. Use stamp. Oh, that's a stencil. Interesting. Okay, let's do skin. Okay, so let's subdivide this one more time. Let's pull. Let's make sure all of our settings are right. Let's bring that up. You can see, let's bring it up a whole lot more and add our build up so we can really see it. For example, then we go into amplify, and it's really going to increase the details on that a lot. So if we subdivide that one more time, you'll see it amplifies the details. All right, then fill. Fill is going to fill in the different areas, kind of like smoothing, but not. It's going to take the areas where there's ridges, and then just kind of build it back up to the top height of our topology. See, and builds it up around the parts that are sticking out. Oops. Cool. Repeat. Pete and repeat. We're in a boat. Pete fell out. Who was left? Repeat. Repeat is similar to the stuff that we've done with pulls, where we're creating the steady stroke and creating the stamp that's similar. What repeat will use specific brushes within here. So for example, if we go into our presets and we go to zippers, these zipper ones, these specific zippers use a repeat. So you can see once we click on that, it goes into our stamp, it loads that in, and in the settings, it also does the steady stroke. So you can see, let's bring the brush size, or the amount, and then let's subdivide it. Oh boy, that's a pretty dense mesh. You can see it follows along and does that specific stamp. So if you're going through, that's kind of neat. That could be used as like a ridge for like a dinosaur or something. But if you're going through and you're looking at all your sculpt presets, sometimes they'll use pull, sometimes they'll use grab, sometimes they'll use repeat. This one in particular is using repeat. There we go. Cool zippers. What else do we have? And then we've got scrape. Okay, what does scrape do? Well, a lot of traditional sculptors will scrape away stuff in order to, let me throw on my symmetry so you can see. A lot of traditional sculptors will scrape away stuff in order to, like, you know, chisel out more areas and stuff in order to build things out. If you're used to working that way, this is what you can use in order to do that. But it basically just kind of scrapes away areas so that you can really, like, it's almost like you're sculpting with real clay, where you're just scraping off the clay. Cool. All right, and then erase will erase everything that you've done, and it will get it back to that original mesh that you've got. Cool. All right, so now that we've got that, you've seen mask, you've seen subdivide, you've seen all these tools. Let's look at volume mesh. So when we click on volume mesh, what it's going to do, let's go ahead and do a few sculpting things. Oh, cool, we've still got that on there. Now, if I click volume mesh, notice it re-topologizes it, which is fine. But if you look at this topology, it's kind of gross. You know, when you're working in sculpting, sometimes this will be good and sometimes they won't. If you're sculpting like a face or a character or something, you're going to want to have really good topology. And something like the volume mesher doesn't give you good topology. So you actually need to go back and re-topologize it yourself instead of relying on the volume mesher. Now, with that said, here's something neat that you can use with the volume mesher. So say, for example, we've got this face. Now let me go ahead and subdivide it, because once you put it in a volume mesh, it messes everything up, or it takes away the sculpting tag. So say we've got another piece. Say we're making a hat, right? Let's go ahead and do the hexahedron. Let's make it editable. Let's go to our sculpting. We'll subdivide it. We'll subdivide it again. And then we'll go ahead and create this hat, right? So let's go ahead and pull this thing out. You know, this area out. Let's subdivide it again. All right, cool. So he's got this neat little beanie, right, on top of his or her face, right? So say we want these to be one mesh. What we can do is we can go into our objects, we can select both of them, and then click on volume mesh, and it creates it into one mesh. Now, here's the problem with it. When you create one mesh, it's also creating one UV. So if you want the hat to be a different color as, like, say, the face, you would have to go back and re-topologize it anyway, or you would have to go into a program like Substance Painter or use Body Paint in order to do the different colors. So I'm not a huge fan of volume meshing. It's great for doing just simple sculpts that you're not really needing to worry about the topology. But when stuff like this, where you could be sculpting for character animation, I would tend to stay away from volume meshing unless you plan on actually re-topologizing the entire thing again. So that's the end of part one. Now we've gone over the tools. So in part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to sculpt a little Homer head, and you can see how these tools actually work and what will be the workflow when you're creating the initial sculpt, going into re-topologize, and then having the good UVs for texturing. So stick around for that one.
Mograph.com, an online resource for motion graphic artists. Start your week with the Mograph podcast. Industry news, interviews with your favorite artists, and terrible humor. Watch live shows and interviews from Mograph events like NAB, SIGGRAPH, Half-Res, and local meetups.
This is exactly what I should be doing.
Our Mograph talks feature live demos and motivation from artists all around the world.
Sometimes you gotta make stuff that you're not gonna put on your reel, and I'm not here to judge.
What if Rick and Morty show up for the countdown at midnight? That's where I peaked in life, in my career.
We gotta stop this thing, Rick! It's gonna kill us all!
Hear from the people that create your software, design your render engines, and artists that are changing the face of modern motion graphics.
You get that render done. Yeah, you better frame what?
Mograph tutorials and online classes will teach you about Cinema 4D, After Effects, as well as other popular software and render engines.
Throw in the HDR Studio, take the render settings, pick the HDR, put in a reflection, and gorgeous.
Join the conversation in our live sessions.
Ah, that's so funny. All right. I'm gonna live forever.
Subscribe today and get the latest updates on our YouTube and other social media channels.
Take all your dreams and just do it!
Subscribe to Mograph.com.